The rain hit the asphalt like bullets as Nora Hale stood motionless in the middle of 7th Avenue, her blue scrubs plastered to her skin, a soggy cardboard box trembling in her arms. She'd been fired an hour ago, publicly humiliated, badge stripped, escorted out like a criminal for saving a child's life without permission. Now, as thunder cracked overhead, two massive military helicopters tore through the storm clouds, searchlights slicing through the downpour, rotors screaming so loud car alarms erupted across 3 blocks. Soldiers rappelled down before the skids even touched pavement. One pointed directly at her. "Where's the nurse?" he shouted over the roar. Not the doctor, not the administrator, the nurse they'd just thrown away. If you want to see how the woman they tried to erase became unstoppable, stay with me until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Nora Hale had started her shift 17 hours earlier, believing it would be ordinary. Pediatric Trauma Wing, Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital, the kind of place where ordinary meant broken bones, allergic reactions, and the occasional midnight fever spike. She'd worked there for 11 years. 11 years of double shifts, of holding parents while their children screamed through procedures, of being the steady hand when doctors' hands shook. She knew every supply closet, every temper, every corner where you could cry for 30 seconds before someone found you. She didn't cry anymore. At 4:47 a.m., the ambulance had roared in with a 7-year-old named Mateo, whose throat was closing from a wasp sting gone catastrophic. Anaphylaxis had progressed to full airway compromise. The on-call physician, Dr. Vincent Caro, was 20 minutes out, stuck in traffic on the causeway, his voice crackling through the phone with instructions to wait, to stabilize, to not do anything irreversible. Nora had watched the oxygen saturation drop. 92, 88, 83. Mateo's mother was screaming in Spanish, clutching Nora's arm hard enough to leave bruises. The boy's lips were blue, his eyes were rolling back. "We don't have 20 minutes, Nora had said to the attending resident, a kid fresh out of medical school who looked like he might vomit. Dr. Caro said to wait for him. That child will be dead in 3 minutes. She'd done it anyway. Pulled the cricothyrotomy kit, made the incision, placed the tube with hands that didn't shake even once. Air rushed into Mateo's lungs. The monitor beeped steadily. His color returned from corpse blue to living pink in under a minute. His mother had collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The resident had stared at Nora like she'd just performed a magic trick he didn't understand. Dr. Caro had arrived 12 minutes later, stormed into the trauma bay, still wearing his golf windbreaker, and exploded. "Who authorized this procedure?" "No one," Nora said. "He was dying." "You don't have the authority to perform surgical airways. You're a nurse." "And he's breathing." Caro's face had gone the color of raw meat. He'd leaned in close enough that she could smell coffee and rage on his breath. "You just ended your career." By 7 a.m., she was in the administrative office. By 8 a.m., the hospital's chief of staff, a man named Gerald Voss who'd never worked a trauma shift in his life, had her badge and her access card on his desk like evidence at a trial. The HR director, a skeletal woman named Diane Pruitt, sat beside him with a legal pad and an expression that suggested she enjoyed this part of her job. "This is gross insubordination," Voss said. "You bypassed protocol. You endangered hospital liability. You made a unilateral decision that should have been made by a licensed physician. I saved a child's life. You performed a medical procedure outside your scope of practice. He would have died." Voss leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like a cartoon villain. "That's not your determination to make. We have hierarchies for a reason, Ms. Hale. If every nurse decided to play doctor whenever they felt inspired, this hospital would be chaos." Diane Pruitt had clicked her pen. "Effective immediately. Your employment is terminated. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to collect personal items from your locker." Nora had felt something crack inside her chest. Not surprise, but something colder. Confirmation, maybe. That doing the right thing had always been punishable. That the system protected itself first, patients second, and people like her not at all. She'd nodded once. "Understood." They hadn't expected her to go quietly. Voss had clearly prepared for tears, for shouting, for some dramatic collapse that would justify calling security early. When she simply stood, smoothed her scrubs, and walked out, he'd looked almost disappointed. The walk through the hospital had been excruciating. Word had already spread. Nurses she'd trained looked away. Orderlies she'd worked beside for years suddenly found their phones fascinating. Dr. Caro had been holding court near the nurses' station, voice loud enough to carry. Reckless. Absolutely reckless. Thank God we caught it before she killed someone. She'd kept walking. Her locker had contained a spare pair of sneakers, a hoodie with a coffee stain on the sleeve, a photo of her late husband tucked into the door. She'd packed everything into a cardboard box someone had left by the recycling. 11 years fit into something that once held printer paper. Security, a kind-faced older man named Jerome, who'd always saved her a seat in the cafeteria, had escorted her to the exit. "I'm sorry, Nora," he'd whispered. "Not your fault. That kid's alive because of you." She'd smiled, but it felt like her face might crack. Doesn't matter. The rain had started the moment she stepped outside. Not a drizzle, but a biblical downpour that turned the sky gray and the streets into rivers. She had no umbrella, no car in the lot anymore. Her parking pass had been deactivated. The bus stop was 4 blocks away. She'd started walking. The box grew heavier with every step. Rain soaked through the cardboard, making it sag and buckle. Her scrubs clung to her like a second skin. People rushed past her with umbrellas and briefcases, none of them stopping, none of them seeing her. She was invisible. She'd always been invisible. Halfway down 7th Avenue, she'd stopped under a broken streetlight and let herself feel it. The weight of 11 years. The exhaustion of caring too much in a system that punished caring. The loneliness of being right in a world that rewarded compliance. "Maybe they're right," she'd whispered to no one. "Maybe I don't matter." The words tasted like surrender. That's when the ground started to vibrate. At first she thought it was thunder. Then she thought it was a subway train, even though Crescent Bay didn't have subways. The vibration grew stronger, rattling the windows of parked cars, setting off alarms in a cascading wave of electronic panic. Nora looked up. 2 black helicopters dropped through the clouds like birds of prey, rotors chopping the rain into horizontal sheets. They were massive. Military transport models with mounted lights and insignia she didn't recognize. The noise was apocalyptic, a physical force that pressed against her chest and made her teeth ache. They descended fast, too fast, landing gear extending as they aimed for the middle of the intersection just ahead of her. Cars screeched to a halt. People screamed. Someone's shopping bags exploded across the pavement as they dove for cover. The helicopters touched down in perfect synchronization, rotors still screaming. And before Nora could process what was happening, the side doors slammed open and soldiers poured out. Not police, not paramedics. Soldiers in full tactical gear, rifles slung, faces hidden behind helmets and visors. One of them, a woman with lieutenant's bars and a voice like a drill sergeant, strode directly toward the hospital entrance, barking into a radio. "Target location confirmed. We need the nurse. Repeat, we need the trauma nurse. Nora Hale." Nora's cardboard box slipped from her hands and hit the ground with a soggy thud. Her brain couldn't connect the pieces. Military, helicopters, her name. Another soldier, this one a man built like a freight train, was scanning the crowd with something that looked like a tablet. His head snapped toward her. "There," he said, pointing. The lieutenant turned. Their eyes met through the rain. "Nora Hale." She couldn't speak. She nodded. The lieutenant crossed the distance in 4 strides, urgency radiating from every movement. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us immediately." What?" "There's no time to explain. You're being requisitioned under emergency medical protocol." "I don't understand. I was just fired. I'm not—" "We don't want a doctor," the lieutenant said, and her voice cut through Nora's panic like a scalpel. "We want you." Behind them, the hospital doors burst open. Dr. Caro appeared, white coat flapping, Gerald Voss right behind him. They'd seen the helicopters. They'd heard her name. Caro's face was purple with indignation. "Excuse me, I'm the senior attending physician here. If there's a medical emergency, I'm the one you need to—" The freight-trained soldier stepped into his path, didn't say a word, just stood there, a wall of muscle and body armor, and Caro's voice died in his throat. Voss tried next, his administrator voice dripping with authority. "I'm the chief of staff. You can't just take our personnel without proper authorization and paperwork. There are protocols." The lieutenant didn't even look at him. Sir, step back or be moved back. This is a matter of national security. National security? This is a nurse we literally just terminated for. Then you should have kept her, the lieutenant snapped. She turned back to Nora, and her voice softened just a fraction. Ms. Hale, a child is dying. We have multiple surgeons on site who can't save her. Intelligence says you're the only person within 100 miles who successfully performed a pediatric emergency cricothyrotomy in the last 6 months. We need you. Now. The rain pounded down. Nora's scrubs were so wet she could wring water from them. Her hair hung in her face. She looked down at the ruined cardboard box at her feet, at the photo of her husband barely visible through the dissolved cardboard. Then she looked up at the helicopter. How long does she have? They said minutes when we left the base. That was 8 minutes ago. Nora didn't hesitate. She turned to the lieutenant. Let's go. They ran. The lieutenant grabbed her arm, not roughly but firmly, guiding her through the chaos of stopped traffic and panicking pedestrians. The helicopter's rotors were still spinning, the noise so loud Nora couldn't hear her own heartbeat. She was lifted, actually lifted, into the cabin by 2 soldiers who strapped her into a jump seat with practiced efficiency. Through the open door, she could see Caro and Voss standing in the rain, mouths open, completely impotent. Diane Pruitt had appeared behind them, legal pad clutched to her chest like a shield. The lieutenant climbed in beside Nora, slammed the door, and pounded the ceiling twice. The helicopter lifted off so fast Nora's stomach dropped into her feet. The city fell away beneath them, buildings shrinking to toys, the hospital becoming just another gray square in a grid of gray squares. She was flying toward something. She didn't know what. She didn't know who the child was or why the military was involved or why they'd chosen her. But for the first time in 11 years, someone had looked at her and said, "You're the only one who can do this." Not a doctor. Not an administrator. Her. The nurse they'd thrown away an hour ago was suddenly the most important person in the sky. And somewhere ahead, a child was running out of time. The helicopter banked hard to the east, and Nora's shoulder slammed into the bulkhead. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched Crescent Bay dissolve into a blur of lights and coastline. The lieutenant was shouting something into her headset, but the rotor noise devoured every word. Another soldier, young, maybe 25, with a name tape that read Morris, thrust a headset at Nora. She pulled it on, and suddenly the chaos organized into voices. ETA 6 minutes to Garrison Point, patient status critical, O2 sat at 71 and dropping. They've attempted intubation twice, both failed. Surgical team is standing by, but the attending says the anatomy is too compromised. What happened to her? Nora cut in, her voice hoarse. The lieutenant turned, and for the first time Nora saw her face clearly. Mid-30s, scar across her left cheek, eyes that had seen things that didn't make it into reports. Her name tape read Kessler. Vehicle collision. High-speed chase terminated in a barricade crash. Front seat passenger, 8-year-old girl, took the dashboard to the throat. Crushed larynx, probable tracheal collapse. She's the daughter of someone important enough that we scrambled 2 birds and pulled every string in the book to find you. Who? Kessler's expression went flat. Above my clearance? Above yours. What matters is she's dying, and you're going to stop that from happening. Nora's hands were shaking. She pressed them between her knees to hide it. I'll need to see her. I'll need a kit. I'll need light, and you'll have everything. They've converted a hangar into a sterile field. We've got surgeons, anesthesiologists, a full trauma setup, but they can't do what you do. I'm a nurse. You're the nurse who saved a kid this morning when a doctor said to wait. That's why you're here. The helicopter hit turbulence and dropped 10 feet in half a second. Morris grabbed a handrail, his face gone green. Nora's stomach lurched, but she kept her eyes on Kessler. If I can't save her, you will. But if I can't, then we all failed, Kessler said. But at least we'll know we brought the best. The word settled into Nora's chest like a stone. The best. An hour ago, she'd been fired for insubordination. Now she was the last hope for a child she'd never met, flying through a storm in a military helicopter because someone, somewhere, had decided she was worth more than the people who'd thrown her away. The city gave way to industrial sprawl, then to wetlands, then to something that looked like a military installation, high fences, guard towers, buildings with no windows. The helicopter descended fast, flaring at the last second, and touched down on a pad marked with faded yellow paint. The second helicopter was already there, rotors winding down, soldiers moving with the efficiency of people who did this often. The door slammed open and Kessler grabbed Nora's arm. "Move!" They ran through rain that hit like gravel, across tarmac that smelled like fuel and wet concrete, toward a hangar with its bay doors wide open and light spilling out like a beacon. Nora's sneakers slapped puddles. Her scrubs were still soaked from the walk she'd been taking a lifetime ago. Her mind was racing. Airway management, pediatric anatomy. What could go wrong? What would definitely go wrong? Inside the hangar, the world snapped into focus. Portable surgical lights blazed down on a makeshift trauma bay, a gurney surrounded by equipment that looked like it had been airlifted from 3 different hospitals. Monitors beeped in frantic discord. A ventilator stood ready but unused. And around the gurney, a cluster of people in surgical gowns and gloves stood frozen, hands hovering over a small shape under a blue drape. A small shape that wasn't moving enough. Nora saw the monitor first. Oxygen saturation at 68, heart rate at 140 and climbing, blood pressure crashing. Then she saw the girl, 8 years old, like Kessler had said. Dark hair matted with blood, face pale as paper, neck swollen and bruised, the skin mottled purple and black where the dashboard had hit. Her chest moved in shallow, desperate hitches. Every breath looked like it cost her everything. A man in surgical scrubs, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of face that belonged on a hospital brochure, turned as Nora approached. His name badge read Dr. Philip Tennant, Chief Surgical Officer. His hands were shaking. "You're the nurse?" His voice was incredulous, borderline hostile. "I am. We have 3 trauma surgeons here. We have an anesthesiologist with 20 years of experience. We have equipment most hospitals don't even have. And they flew in a nurse?" Kessler stepped between them, her voice cold as January. "They flew in the person who's done this procedure successfully under field conditions, which, according to our records, is more than anyone in this room can say." Tennant's jaw worked. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the monitor's alarm cut him off. A shrill, continuous scream that meant the oxygen saturation had dropped below 65. Nora moved. She pushed past Tennant, past the other surgeons who stood paralyzed by protocol and hierarchy, and went straight to the girl's side. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd imagined. The entire anterior neck was a swollen mass of tissue. The trachea wasn't just compressed, it was collapsed, the cartilage crushed inward like a stepped-on soda can. "How long has she been like this?" Nora asked, not looking up. A younger surgeon, a woman with red hair and terror in her eyes, answered. 17 minutes since the crash. We've tried twice to intubate. The vocal cords are obliterated. There's no passage. We attempted a needle cricothyrotomy, but the anatomy is so distorted we couldn't land it." "And you stopped?" "We didn't want to make it worse." Nora looked up at her. "Worse than dead?" The surgeon flinched. Nora turned to Kessler. "I need everyone out except essential personnel. I need the lights repositioned. I need someone to hand me instruments and someone to monitor vitals. Everyone else, get out of my line of sight." Tennant sputtered. "You can't just—" "Doctor, I have about 90 seconds before this child goes into cardiac arrest. You can help, you can watch, or you can leave. Choose fast." For a moment, the hangar was silent except for the monitors and the rain hammering the roof. Then Tennant stepped back, his face the color of old meat. The other surgeons followed, moving to the periphery like they'd been dismissed from their own operating room. The red-haired surgeon stayed. "I'll assist." "Name?" "Dr. Amara Singh." "Okay, Dr. Singh, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to make a vertical incision over the cricothyroid membrane. The anatomy is destroyed, so I'm going to have to find it by feel. When I do, I'm going to place a tube. If I can't find the membrane, I'm going to go lower and create a tracheal window. Either way, she's going to bleed and you're going to suction. Clear?" Singh nodded, already moving to reposition the light. Her hands were steady now. Fear had burned off into purpose. Nora pulled on gloves that someone thrust at her. She took the scalpel that appeared in Singh's hand. She looked down at the girl's face one more time, at the closed eyes and blue-tinged lips, at the small, fragile life that was slipping away. What's her name? Nora asked. Kessler's voice came from somewhere behind her. Emma. Okay, Emma, Nora whispered. I've got you. She made the cut. Blood welled immediately, dark and viscous, flooding the field. Singh was there with suction before Nora had to ask, the tip hovering, pulling the blood away. Nora's fingers moved through the tissue, feeling for landmarks that should have been obvious, but were now just pulp and swelling. The cricoid cartilage should have been here. The thyroid cartilage should have been here. Everything was wrong. The monitor screamed louder. Oxygen saturation at 59. Pressure's dropping, someone called out. Systolics at 80. Nora ignored them. Her world had shrunk to the size of a 2-inch incision. She felt deeper, past the strap muscles, past the shredded fascia, searching for anything solid. Her finger brushed something, cartilage maybe, or scar tissue. She pressed gently, and the tissue gave way with a soft pop. Air hissed out. There, Nora breathed. She widened the opening with her fingers, forcing the tissue apart, and grabbed the tube from the tray. It was smaller than she would have liked, pediatric equipment, meant for normal anatomy, not for this disaster. She guided it in, feeling for resistance, praying she was in the trachea and not the esophagus or some fasciole plane that would kill Emma just as dead. The tube slid home. Nora connected the bag valve mask and squeezed. For a terrible, endless second, nothing happened. Then the monitor's tone changed. The alarm stopped. The oxygen saturation number climbed. 62, 65, 70. Emma's chest rose. Fell. Rose again. Singh let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Someone behind Nora whispered, Jesus Christ. Nora didn't let go of the bag. She kept squeezing, kept breathing for Emma, watching the numbers climb. 75, 80, 85. The girl's lips went from blue to pink. The modeling on her face began to fade. Tennant's voice cut through the silence, sharp and defensive. We need to secure that airway properly. We need to get her to a real OR, get imaging, assess the full extent of... She's stable, Nora said quietly. She'll stay stable as long as someone manages this tube and monitors her pressure. You've got surgeons, you've got equipment. Do your job now that I've done mine. She handed the bag valve mask to Singh, who took it with hands that no longer shook. Nora stepped back, peeling off her gloves, and only then did she realize her scrubs were soaked with blood. Her hands were crimson to the wrists. Her arms ached. Kessler appeared at her side. You just saved her life. Maybe. She's not out of the woods. She was dead 3 minutes ago. Now she's breathing. I'd call that a win. Nora looked around the hangar. The other surgeons were moving now, taking over, setting up IV lines and preparing transport. Tennant was barking orders, his voice authoritative again now that the crisis had passed. No one looked at Nora. No one said thank you. She was invisible again, except to Kessler, who was watching her with something that looked like respect. Who is she? Nora asked again. Who's Emma? Before Kessler could answer, the hangar's side door opened and a man walked in. He was older, 60s maybe, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Nora made in a month. His face was haggard, eyes red-rimmed, and the moment he saw Emma on the gurney, saw her chest rising and falling, his knees nearly buckled. 2 people in dark suits caught him. Secret Service, Nora realized. This wasn't just military. This was federal. The man crossed to the gurney, moving like he was walking through deep water. He touched Emma's hand, just her fingertips, like he was afraid she'd break. Then he turned, scanning the room until his eyes found Nora. He walked toward her, and everyone in the hangar went still. Up close, Nora recognized him. She'd seen his face on the news, in papers, on screens in hospital waiting rooms. Senator William Cross, chair of the Armed Services Committee, presidential candidate in the last election, one of the most powerful men in the country, and Emma was his granddaughter. Cross stopped in front of Nora, and for a moment he just looked at her blood-soaked scrubs, her wet hair, the exhaustion written into every line of her face. Then he said, "They told me you were fired this morning." Nora's throat was dry. "Yes, sir." "For saving a child's life without permission." "That's what they said." Cross glanced back at Emma, at the tube in her throat, at the monitors that showed a life continuing instead of ending. When he turned back to Nora, his eyes were wet. "What hospital?" Crescent Bay Memorial. He pulled out his phone, dialed, and waited. When someone answered, his voice went cold as winter. "This is Senator Cross. I need you to connect me to the Chief of Staff at Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital. Now." A pause, shuffling, then a new voice on the other end. Tinny, distant but recognizable. Gerald Voss. "Senator Cross, this is an unexpected. You fired a nurse named Nora Hale this morning." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss personnel matters without proper—" "She just saved my granddaughter's life, the same granddaughter your hospital's protocols and politics and bureaucratic cowardice would have let die. So I'm going to ask you one question, and I want a very specific answer. Why was she fired?" Voss's voice went thin. "There were procedural violations. She performed a medical procedure outside her. She saved a child. Without authorization, without following proper channels. We have standards, Senator. We have liability concerns. If we let every nurse decide to practice medicine without supervision—" "Shut up," Cross said, and his voice could have frozen magma. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to gather every person involved in that termination decision. You're going to pull every document, every email, every note from her file. And you're going to have it ready, because in about 6 hours, federal investigators are going to arrive at your hospital with questions about fraudulent billing, Medicare fraud, and patient endangerment. I hope for your sake that Ms. Hale's firing is the only questionable decision you've made recently." He hung up. The hangar was silent. Tennant looked like he'd swallowed glass. The other surgeons found their shoes fascinating. Cross turned back to Nora. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "It's not your fault." "Maybe not, but I'm going to make sure it's fixed." He glanced at Kessler. "She's under federal protection until this is resolved. Anyone who wants to speak to her goes through me." Kessler nodded. "Understood, sir." Cross took Nora's hand, her bloody, trembling hand, and shook it. "Thank you. You gave me my granddaughter back. If there's anything I can ever do—" "Just make sure she heals," Nora said. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd just stepped back from the edge of an abyss. "She will, because of you." He walked back to Emma's gurney, back to the team preparing her for transport, and Nora was left standing in the middle of the hangar, feeling like she'd just survived a car crash. Singh approached, pulling off her gloves. "That was the best field airway I've ever seen. Where'd you train?" "County trauma units, teaching hospitals. Anywhere they'd let me learn." "You should be teaching surgeons." "I was fired this morning, remember?" Singh's expression hardened. "Not for long, I'm guessing." She nodded toward Cross, who was on his phone again, voice low and intense. "That man just declared war on your old hospital. I'd bet money they're already panicking." Nora didn't feel victorious. She felt tired, hollowed out, like she'd given everything she had and wasn't sure there was anything left. Kessler touched her shoulder. "We need to debrief. There's a conference room upstairs. You'll be there for a few hours while we process everything." "I just want to go home." "Can't let you do that yet. You're a witness now, possibly a key asset in a federal investigation." Kessler's voice softened. "But we'll get you coffee, clean scrubs, a place to sit down." Morris appeared with a blanket and draped it over Nora's shoulders. It was wool, scratchy, and smelled like storage, but it was warm. She pulled it tight and followed Kessler toward the door, past the surgeons who still wouldn't look at her, past the equipment that had saved Emma's life. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, stars breaking through the clouds in scattered clusters. The second helicopter was lifting off, probably heading back to Crescent Bay to spread the news, to make sure everyone knew what had happened here. Nora looked back at the hangar one more time. Through the open bay doors, she could see Emma being loaded onto a transport gurney, Senator Cross walking beside her, one hand on her shoulder. A family reunited, a life saved. And somewhere in Crescent Bay, Gerald Voss was probably pouring himself a drink and realizing his career was over. Upstairs, the conference room was exactly what Nora expected. Government-issue furniture, bad lighting, a coffee maker that looked like it predated the building. Kessler poured her a cup that tasted like burnt dirt and sat across from her. "You're going to be famous," Kessler said. Nora laughed, but it came out bitter. "I don't want to be famous. I want to do my job." "You will, just not at that hospital." Kessler leaned forward. Senator Cross doesn't make empty threats. If he said he's sending investigators, they're already on the way. Crescent Bay Memorial is about to have a very bad week. Good. You mean that? Nora thought about Gerald Voss's face when he'd stripped her badge, about Dr. Caro's smug rage, about Diane Pruitt's legal pad and her clinical satisfaction, about 11 years of being told to know her place. Yeah, she said, I mean it. Kessler smiled. Good, because tomorrow morning, this goes public. The senator's office is preparing a statement. They're going to name you. They're going to explain what happened, and every news outlet in the state is going to want to talk to you. Nora's hands tightened around the coffee cup. I don't want to talk to the news. You might not have a choice, but you'll have support. The senator's team will handle the media. We'll make sure you're protected. Kessler paused. You did something incredible tonight, Nora. You saved a life when everyone else had given up. People need to know that. People need to see that the system punished you for being right. The door opened and a man in a dark suit entered. One of Cross's people, probably. He nodded to Kessler, handed her a tablet, and left without speaking. Kessler scrolled for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned the tablet toward Nora. It was a news article, timestamped 20 minutes ago. Breaking, Crescent Bay Memorial under federal investigation. Hospital officials scramble as Senator Cross alleges wrongful termination and potential fraud. Below the headline was a photo of the hospital. Below that, a statement from Voss's office, vague, defensive, full of phrases like ongoing review and committed to excellence. Nora read it twice. She felt something uncurl in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. Justice, maybe. Or just the knowledge that for once the people who'd hurt her were going to face consequences. They're already trying to spin it, Kessler said. Damage control. But it's too late. The senator's statement goes live in 3 hours, and when it does, the whole country is going to know what they did to you. Nora set down the coffee cup. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. From adrenaline. From the slow-burning realization that she'd survived something that should have destroyed her. What happens to me now? She asked. Kessler leaned back. That's up to you. You could go back to nursing somewhere else. You could teach. You could consult. Hell, with the senator backing you, you could probably write your own ticket. She paused. Or you could rest. Take time. Figure out what you want. I want to work. Then you'll work, just not for people who don't value you. Nora looked out the window at the base below, at the lights and the rain-slicked tarmac and the helicopter sitting silent on the pad. Somewhere out there, Emma was being stabilized, monitored, saved. Somewhere out there, a hospital was burning down under the weight of its own corruption. And somewhere in Crescent Bay, Dr. Vincent Caro was probably realizing that the nurse he'd destroyed this morning was about to become untouchable. The tablet on the table buzzed. Kessler glanced at it, then at Nora. The senator wants to see you before you leave. He's got someone with him, someone who wants to say thank you. Nora stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Emma? She's awake. The walk down the hallway felt like walking through water. Nora's legs were numb. Her mind was spinning. She'd saved 2 children in 1 day. She'd been fired and vindicated in the span of hours. She'd gone from invisible to essential in the time it took a helicopter to cross the bay. The room they led her to was small, dimly lit, full of medical equipment on standby. And in the bed, propped up on pillows, was Emma. She looked impossibly small. The tube was still in her throat, secured with surgical tape, but her eyes were open, clear, aware. Her father, a younger version of Senator Cross, sat beside her, holding her hand. Cross stood near the window. When Nora entered, he gestured her forward. Emma, he said gently, this is the person who saved you. Emma's eyes found Nora. She couldn't speak, couldn't smile, but she lifted her free hand, just a little, just enough. Nora crossed the room and took it. The girl's fingers were warm, her pulse steady under Nora's thumb. You're going to be okay, Nora whispered. You're going to heal. You're going to have a long, full life. Emma squeezed her hand, and in that moment, Nora understood something she'd been too exhausted to see before. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Voss wrong or watching Caro fall. It was about this, about the lives saved, about the children who got to grow up because someone refused to follow orders that would have killed them. Senator Cross's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went cold. "The hospital just released a statement," he said quietly. "They're claiming you were fired for a pattern of unsafe behavior. They're suggesting tonight's emergency was staged to rehabilitate your reputation." The room went silent. Nora felt something ignite in her chest. Not anger, clarity. "Then we show them the truth," she said. Cross looked at her, and for the first time she saw the full weight of the power he carried. "Yes," he said, "we do." He made a call. Nora couldn't hear who answered, but she heard Cross's voice, calm and absolute. "Prepare the full briefing. Medical records, witness statements, everything. We go public at dawn." He hung up and looked at Nora. "By tomorrow morning, the world is going to know exactly what happened, and Crescent Bay Memorial is going to wish they'd never heard your name." Nora glanced back at Emma, at the girl whose life she'd saved, at the steady rhythm of the monitor that proved she'd been right to act. Then she looked at Senator Cross and said, "Let them come." The sun hadn't risen yet when Nora found herself sitting in a black SUV with tinted windows, traveling back toward Crescent Bay at 70 miles an hour. Kessler sat beside her, scrolling through her phone with the focused intensity of someone watching a battle unfold in real time. Morris drove, silent and efficient. In the seat ahead, a communications specialist named Torres was typing furiously on a laptop, coordinating something Nora didn't fully understand but could feel in the tension radiating through the vehicle. "Statement goes live in 4 minutes, Torres said without looking up. "Major networks have been briefed. AP, Reuters, local affiliates, they're all standing by." Nora stared out the window at the highway blurring past. Somewhere behind them, Emma was stable, recovering, surrounded by the best medical care money and power could buy. Somewhere ahead, the hospital that had destroyed her career was about to learn what happened when you threw away the wrong person. Her phone, returned to her an hour ago along with her ruined cardboard box and a fresh set of scrubs, buzzed incessantly. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize, voicemails piling up. She turned it off and shoved it in her pocket. "They're going to come at you hard," Kessler said, not looking up from her own phone. "Voss, Caro, the hospital's legal team. They're already building a counter-narrative. I've seen the drafts. They're claiming you have a history of reckless behavior, that you've been reprimanded before, that tonight was a publicity stunt orchestrated by the senator to cover up." She stopped, jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter. None of it's going to stick." "How do you know?" Kessler finally looked at her. "Because we have Emma. We have medical records. We have testimony from Dr. Singh and 2 other witnesses who watched you do what their entire surgical team couldn't. And we have the senator, who doesn't lose fights." She paused. "But you need to be ready. This is about to get ugly." The SUV took the exit toward Crescent Bay, and Nora's stomach twisted. She'd spent 11 years in this city. She'd saved lives in its emergency rooms, walked its streets, knew its rhythms. Now it felt hostile, like enemy territory. Torres's laptop chimed. "Statement is live. Networks are running it now." Kessler pulled up a video on her phone and turned it toward Nora. Senator Cross stood at a podium, the seal of the Armed Services Committee behind him, his face grave and controlled. The timestamp read 5:47 a.m. "Last night," Cross began, "my 8-year-old granddaughter was involved in a catastrophic vehicle accident that left her with a crushed airway and minutes to live. Multiple trauma surgeons attempted to save her and failed. A nurse named Nora Hale, who had been wrongfully terminated from Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital just hours earlier for the alleged crime of saving another child's life without administrative permission, was brought in as a last resort. She succeeded where everyone else had failed. My granddaughter is alive today because of her skill, her courage, and her refusal to let protocol override a child's right to live." The camera flashed to a photo of Nora, her hospital ID badge from 3 years ago, before exhaustion had etched itself into her face. She barely recognized herself. Cross continued, "I am calling for a full federal investigation into Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital for wrongful termination, patient endangerment, and possible Medicare fraud. I am also calling for Ms. Hale's immediate reinstatement with full back pay and a formal apology. What happened to her is a symptom of a broken system that punishes competence and protects incompetence. It ends now. The video cut off. Kessler's phone exploded with notifications. That's 20 million views in 3 minutes, Torres said, staring at his screen. It's everywhere. Nora felt dizzy. 20 million people. Her name, her face, her entire life suddenly public property. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. You didn't have to, Kessler said. You did your job. The senator's doing his. The SUV slowed as they entered Crescent Bay proper. Dawn was breaking, washing the buildings in pale gray light. The streets were empty except for a few early commuters and delivery trucks. But as they approached the hospital, Nora saw the crowd. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes deployed, reporters setting up shots in front of the main entrance. Cameras, lights, dozens of people moving with coordinated chaos. The hospital itself looked dark and fortified, blinds drawn, main doors flanked by security guards who looked nervous. Morris parked 2 blocks away, engine idling. Orders? He asked Kessler. Hold position. Let them make the first move. Nora's phone buzzed, even though she'd turned it off. She pulled it out, confused, and saw the screen lit up with an emergency alert. Multiple missed calls from the same number. She didn't recognize it, but something made her answer. Miss Hale. The voice was female, breathless, terrified. This is Lori Chen. I'm a nurse in the ICU at Crescent Bay. I need to talk to you. I'm not working there anymore. I know. Everyone knows, but you need to hear this. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. They're purging files. Voss and Caro, they've been in the records room since 4 a.m. They're shredding documents, deleting emails. I heard them talking. They're trying to erase any evidence that contradicts their story about you. Nora's blood went cold. What kind of evidence? Everything. Your performance reviews. The incident reports that cleared you of previous complaints. Patient outcomes data that shows you had the best save rate in the trauma department. Chen paused. There's more. They've been coding certain procedures incorrectly for years, billing Medicare for services that were never provided or were done by nurses instead of physicians. You were never part of it, but you witnessed enough that if anyone started digging, you'd be a problem for them. Kessler was watching Nora's face. She mouthed, "Speaker." Nora hit the button. Chen's voice filled the SUV. And they're scared. Voss is talking about suing you for defamation. Caro's calling colleagues, trying to build a coalition to discredit you. But some of us remember what you did. Some of us know you're the reason a lot of patients walked out of here alive. Why are you telling me this? Nora asked. Because it's not right. What they did to you. It's not right. And if you're going to fight back, you need to know what you're up against. Kessler leaned toward the phone. Ms. Chen, this is Lieutenant Kessler, Federal Liaison. Can you document what you're seeing? Photos, videos, anything? A pause. Then, I can try, but if they catch me, they won't. Send everything to this number. We'll make sure it's protected. Kessler rattled off a secure line. Okay. I'll do it. Chen's voice cracked. Ms. Hale, I'm sorry. I should have said something when they fired you. We all should have. It's not too late, Nora said quietly. The line went dead. Torres was already typing. If they're destroying evidence, we can move for an emergency injunction. Federal marshals can secure the records room within an hour. Do it, Kessler said. She turned to Nora. This just became a criminal investigation. The SUV's radio crackled. Morris answered, listened, then looked at Kessler. Hospital just released a statement. They're holding a press conference in 30 minutes. Voss and Caro are both speaking. Kessler smiled, but it was the smile of a wolf. Of course they are. They think they can control the narrative. She looked at Nora. You want to see this? Nora thought about it. About facing the people who'd humiliated her, who were even now trying to erase her existence. About standing in front of cameras and reporters while they lied about her. Yes, she said, I want to see it. They moved closer, parking where they could see the hospital's main entrance, but remain hidden behind the news vans. At exactly 6:15 a.m., the doors opened and Gerald Voss emerged, flanked by Diane Pruitt and Dr. Vincent Caro. All three wore expensive suits and expressions of practiced concern. A temporary podium had been set up. Voss approached it like a man walking to his own execution, but determined to maintain dignity. The cameras swung toward him, red lights blazing. "Good morning," Voss began, his voice amplified by portable speakers. "I'm here to address the serious and defamatory allegations made against Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital. First, let me be clear. We did not wrongfully terminate anyone. Nora Hale was released from her duties after a pattern of behavioral issues and violations of medical protocol that put patients at risk." Nora's hands clenched into fists. Voss continued, "While we sympathize with Senator Cross and his family's recent trauma, we cannot allow false narratives to damage the reputation of an institution that has served this community for 40 years. Ms. Hale's termination was justified, documented, and followed all applicable employment law." A reporter shouted a question. Voss ignored it. "Furthermore," he said, "we have reason to believe that last night's emergency was staged or exaggerated to create a false heroic narrative. We have requested an independent review of the medical records to verify." "That's a lie." The voice came from the crowd. Heads turned. Cameras swiveled. "Doctor." Amara Singh stepped forward, still in surgical scrubs, her red hair pulled back, exhaustion and fury etched into her face. Voss went pale. "Dr. Singh, this is not the appropriate—" "I was there," Singh said, loud enough to carry. "I assisted Ms. Hale last night. I watched her save a child's life when 3 senior surgeons, including Dr. Caro, stood frozen because they didn't know what to do. There was nothing staged about it. That little girl was dying, and Nora Hale brought her back." The reporters erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Caro stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Dr. Singh is understandably emotional after a difficult night," he said smoothly, "but the facts remain." "The facts are that you're a coward," Singh shot back. "You've spent 20 years hiding behind protocols and letting nurses do the hard work while you take the credit. Nora Hale is a better clinician than you'll ever be, and you fired her because she made you look incompetent." Caro's face went purple. "You're out of line, doctor." "No, I'm done being silent." More movement in the crowd. Nurses were emerging from the hospital, 4, then 6, then a dozen. Some in scrubs, some in street clothes, all of them moving to stand near Singh. Nora recognized faces. Lori Chen, Marcus Webb from the ER, Teresa Alvarado from pediatrics, people she'd worked with for years. Chen stepped forward, holding up her phone. "We have evidence. Photos of the records room, shredded documents, deleted files, everything you're trying to hide." Voss looked like he might collapse. Diane Pruitt grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but he shook her off. This is an orchestrated attack," Voss stammered. "These employees are violating their contracts, breaching confidentiality." "We're telling the truth," Chen said, "and we're not going to let you destroy Nora to save yourselves." The crowd of nurses was growing, 20 now, 30, some holding signs that read, "Reinstate Nora and nurses save lives." One held a printout of Senator Cross's statement. Kessler was watching the scene with professional detachment. "They're done," she said quietly. Voss just lost his own staff on live television. Torres's laptop chimed. "Federal marshals are en route. ETA 12 minutes. They'll secure the hospital records and begin interviewing staff." Nora watched Voss struggle to regain composure, watched Caro scan the crowd like he was looking for an escape route, watched Diane Pruitt frantically typing on her phone. They thought they could bury her. They thought their power and their titles and their carefully crafted lies would be enough. They'd been wrong. A reporter pushed through the crowd, microphone extended. "Mr. Voss, is it true that the hospital has been under investigation for Medicare fraud?" Voss's eyes went wide. I have no comment on. Is it true that you've been coding procedures incorrectly to inflate billing? We have always maintained the highest standards of. Is it true that Nora Hale was fired because she witnessed these practices?" Voss stepped back from the podium. The reporters surged forward. Caro grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the entrance, but the crowd of nurses blocked their path. Singh stepped directly in front of Voss. "You're not going back inside to destroy more evidence. You're going to stand here and face what you've done." Voss tried to push past her. Singh didn't move. "Security!" Voss shouted. "Get these people out of here!" The security guards, Jerome among them, didn't move. Jerome crossed his arms and looked away. Sirens echoed in the distance. The federal marshals were close. Kessler opened the SUV door. "Time to go." "Where?" Nora asked. "Somewhere they can't get to you until this is sorted. Senator's orders. You're under federal protection until the investigation concludes." Nora looked at the chaos unfolding in front of the hospital. At the nurses standing together. At Voss and Caro trapped by their own lies. At the reporters documenting every second. "I want to talk to them," she said. Kessler hesitated. "The press?" "The nurses. The people who stood up." "Not safe. Not yet. I don't care about safe. They risked their jobs for me. I need to thank them." Kessler studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. 5 minutes. Stay close to me." They approached from the side, Kessler's hand on Nora's elbow, Morris flanking them. The reporters spotted Nora immediately, and the entire crowd pivoted toward her like a single organism. Cameras, microphones, shouted questions creating a wall of noise. Kessler held up a hand. "Ms. Hale has no comment at this time. She's here to speak with her former colleagues." The nurses saw her. Chen's face crumpled. Singh smiled. Teresa Alvarado pushed through the crowd and hugged Nora so hard it hurt. "We should have done this yesterday," Teresa whispered. "We should have walked out when they fired you." "You're doing it now," Nora said. "That's what matters." More hugs, more apologies. Marcus Webb, a giant of a man who'd once carried a 300-pound patient down 4 flights of stairs during a fire drill, had tears in his eyes. "You taught me everything I know," he said. "You saved my ass more times than I can count. We weren't going to let them erase you." Nora's throat was tight. She looked at the crowd of nurses, 40 now, maybe 50, and realized this was bigger than her. This was about every person who'd been punished for doing the right thing. Every nurse who'd been told to know their place. Every life saved in defiance of rules that prioritize paperwork over people. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke. "All of you, thank you." A black sedan pulled up, and Senator Cross stepped out. The crowd went silent. He walked directly to Nora, and the cameras captured every step. "How's Emma?" Nora asked. "Stable. Improving. Asking for you, actually." He smiled. "She can't talk yet, but she wrote you a note." He handed Nora a piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky, childish. "Thank you for saving me. You're a hero." Nora folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Cross turned to face the cameras, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire plaza. "What you're witnessing here is the difference between bureaucracy and humanity, between people who protect systems and people who protect lives. Nora Hale represents everything good about the medical profession. The administrators who fired her represent everything broken." He gestured toward the hospital. "Federal marshals are about to secure this facility and begin a comprehensive investigation. If the allegations of fraud, evidence destruction, and wrongful termination are substantiated, and I believe they will be, there will be arrests, there will be prosecutions, and there will be accountability." Voss, still trapped near the entrance, looked like he might be sick. Cross continued. "But more importantly, there will be change. I am personally committed to ensuring that no healthcare worker is ever again punished for saving a life. Ms. Hale's case will set a precedent. Her courage will protect others." He turned to Nora. "You've been offered positions at 3 major hospitals in the past hour. You have job security for life. But before you make any decisions, I'd like you to consider something else." Nora blinked. "What?" "Building something new. A trauma center focused on pediatric emergency medicine. Staffed by people who understand that protocols serve patients, not the other way around. Led by someone who's proven they'll do what's right even when it costs them everything." He paused. "Led by you." The crowd erupted, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Nora stood frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. I'm just a nurse," she said. "You're the nurse who changed everything," Cross replied. "Take some time, think about it, but know that you have support, you have resources, and you have an entire community of people who believe in you." 3 unmarked vehicles pulled up, and federal marshals emerged in tactical gear. They moved with quiet efficiency toward the hospital entrance. Voss tried to retreat inside, but a marshal intercepted him. "Gerald Voss, you're being detained for questioning regarding federal fraud investigation. You have the right to remain silent." The words faded into the background as Voss was led away, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he'd worn to the wrong party. Diane Pruitt was next, then 2 other administrators Nora barely knew. Caro tried to slip away through the crowd, but Singh pointed him out and a marshal caught him by the loading dock. Within 10 minutes, the hospital's entire leadership was in federal custody. The nurses cheered, some cried. The reporters captured it all. Kessler touched Nora's shoulder. "We need to move you. This is about to get more chaotic." Nora let herself be guided back toward the SUV, but she kept looking back at the hospital, at the building where she'd spent 11 years, where she'd saved lives and lost sleep and learned what she was capable of. It looked smaller now, less significant. The SUV pulled away as the sun finally broke above the horizon, turning the sky orange and gold. Nora's phone, turned back on, buzzed with messages. Job offers, interview requests, messages of support from nurses across the country who'd heard her story and recognized their own. One message stood out. From Dr. Philip Tennant, the surgeon who'd doubted her in the hangar. "I was wrong about you. I'm sorry. If you ever want to teach, I know programs that would be honored to have you." Nora closed her eyes and leaned back against the seat. Exhaustion hit her like a wave. She'd been awake for 36 hours. She'd saved 2 children. She'd been fired and vindicated. She'd watched her enemies fall and her allies rise. And somewhere in Crescent Bay, an 8-year-old girl named Emma was breathing because Nora had refused to wait for permission. "Where are we going?" she asked Kessler. "Safe house, federal protection until the investigation wraps up. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks." "And then?" Kessler smiled. "Then you decide what kind of hero you want to be." The SUV merged onto the highway, leaving Crescent Bay behind. Nora watched the city shrink in the side mirror until it was just another collection of buildings against the sky. Her phone buzzed one more time, a text from an unknown number. "This is Mateo's mother. I heard what they did to you. I heard what you did last night. You saved my son. You saved another child. You are a blessing. Thank you. God bless you always." Nora stared at the message until the words blurred. She thought about responding, but her hands were shaking too hard. Kessler was on her phone coordinating something. Torres was typing. Morris drove in silence, and Nora sat in the back of a government vehicle holding a note from a little girl she'd saved, watching her old life disappear behind her while a new one waited somewhere ahead. The radio crackled. A voice she didn't recognize. "Federal marshals have secured the records room. Initial assessment shows extensive document destruction. We're recovering what we can. Voss and Caro are being transported for formal processing. The hospital board has requested an emergency meeting." Kessler glanced at Nora. "It's over. They lost." But Nora knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because somewhere in the country, another nurse was being told to wait, to follow protocol, to let someone die while administrators made decisions. Another person was being punished for being right. And now they had proof that fighting back could win. Her phone rang. Senator Cross. "Ms. Hale," he said when she answered, "I wanted you to hear this directly from me. The hospital board just voted unanimously to terminate Voss, Caro, and 4 other senior administrators. They're offering you full reinstatement, public apology, and compensation for damages." Nora's breath caught. "What did you tell them?" "I told them you'd consider it, but between us?" His voice dropped. "You're worth more than that place ever deserved. Don't settle for going back. Build something better." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Cross said, "Emma wants to meet you properly, when she can talk. She wants to say thank you herself." "I'd like that," Nora whispered. "Good. Take care of yourself, Ms. Hale. You've earned it." He hung up. The SUV took an exit Nora didn't recognize, heading toward a part of the state she'd never visited. The sun was higher now, burning off the last of the morning fog. The world looked clean, new. Kessler was watching her with something that might have been respect. "How do you feel?" Nora thought about it. about the fear and the fury and the exhaustion, about the children she'd saved and the career she'd lost and found again, about the people who'd tried to destroy her and the people who'd stood up when it mattered. "I feel ready," she said. "For what?" Nora looked out at the road ahead, at the unknown future waiting beyond the next curve. She thought about a trauma center that didn't exist yet, about nurses who needed someone to fight for them, about children who deserved to be saved regardless of what the paperwork said. She thought about the note in her pocket, and the lives she'd touched, and the system she'd just proven could be beaten. "For whatever comes next," she said. And somewhere behind them, in a city that would never forget her name, the hospital that had thrown her away was learning what it meant to lose someone irreplaceable. The safe house turned out to be a nondescript ranch home 40 miles outside Crescent Bay, surrounded by pine trees and silence. Kessler swept the perimeter while Morris unloaded equipment from the SUV. Torres had already set up a communications hub in what used to be a dining room, laptops, monitors, encrypted phones creating a nerve center that hummed with quiet efficiency. Nora stood in the living room, still in blood-stained scrubs, still clutching Emma's note, and felt the weight of 36 hours crash into her all at once. Her legs went weak. She sat down hard on a couch that smelled like dust and disuse. "Sleep," Kessler said, appearing with a bottle of water and what looked like military rations. "You've got 4 hours before the next wave hits." "Next wave?" "Depositions. Interviews. The hospital's attorneys are going to fight back hard, and they'll need your testimony locked down before they can proceed." Kessler set the food on the coffee table. "But right now, you need to not collapse. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "Close enough." Kessler's expression softened. "You did good, Hale. Better than good. But this isn't over, and you need to be sharp for what's coming." Nora wanted to argue, but exhaustion had stolen her words. She ate mechanically, some kind of protein bar that tasted like cardboard and determination, and drank the entire bottle of water. Then she let Kessler guide her to a bedroom that had clean sheets and blackout curtains. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. When she woke, the light filtering through the curtains was golden and slanted, late afternoon. Her phone showed 4:47 p.m. and 263 missed notifications. She ignored all of them except one, a text from Senator Cross with a video attachment. The video was shaky, clearly recorded on someone's phone. It showed the interior of Crescent Bay Memorial's main conference room. The hospital board sat around a long table, 12 people in expensive suits, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. At the head of the table, a woman Nora didn't recognize was speaking. "The scope of the fraud is still being determined, but preliminary analysis suggests systematic overbilling dating back at least 7 years. Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, all of it. We're looking at potential liability in excess of $40 million. One board member, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward. "And the termination of Ms. Hale? Where does that fit?" The woman consulted her notes. "Ms. Hale's personnel file shows exemplary performance reviews for 10 years. Last year, there's a sudden shift. 3 written reprimands, all signed by Dr. Caro and countersigned by Mr. Voss. The incidents cited are vague and unsupported by witness statements. It appears they were building a paper trail to justify termination." "Why, Murta?" "We believe Ms. Hale witnessed irregularities in how procedures were being documented and billed. She never filed a formal complaint, but her presence represented a liability. If federal investigators interviewed her, she could corroborate discrepancies between actual care provided and what was billed to Medicare." The silver-haired board member's face went gray. "So they fired her to silence her? And when that failed, they attempted to destroy her credibility through public statements that were demonstrably false." The woman closed her folder. "Gentlemen, ladies, this hospital is facing criminal prosecution, civil lawsuits, and the loss of our Medicare certification. The only path forward is complete transparency and cooperation with federal investigators." "What about Voss and Caro?" "Both are in federal custody. The FBI has seized their personal electronics, financial records, and communications." "Doctor, Caro's attorney has indicated he may be willing to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges." Someone swore quietly. Another board member dropped her head into her hands. The video ended. Nora stared at the screen, processing. Caro was going to flip. He was going to testify against Voss, against the system, against everyone who'd protected the fraud. And in doing so, he'd dismantle the very structure that had enabled him to destroy her. She found Kessler in the communications room, coordinating with someone on a secure line. When she saw Nora, she held up one finger. Wait, and finished her conversation. Update, Kessler said, hanging up. Caro's attorney just filed a proffer agreement. He's giving the FBI everything in exchange for immunity on the fraud charges. Voss's lawyer is scrambling to do damage control, but it's too late. Caro's testimony is going to bury him. What about Diane Pruitt? Singing like a bird. She's already provided emails showing Voss ordered her to fabricate the reprimands in your file. She claims she objected but was overruled. Kessler's expression was sardonic. Convenient memory, that. Nora sat down in a folding chair that creaked under her weight. So they're all turning on each other. That's what happens when the ship sinks. Everyone grabs a life raft and pushes everyone else into the water. Kessler pulled up a document on one of the monitors. You need to see this. It's the full forensic report on your personnel file. The document was dense, pages of analysis, highlighted sections, timestamps, but the summary was clear. Every negative evaluation, every reprimand, every piece of documentation used to justify Nora's termination had been created in a 3-week period last month, all of it fabricated, all of it designed to build a case that would survive legal scrutiny. They planned this, Nora said slowly. They knew federal investigators were coming and they needed me gone before I could be interviewed. Exactly. You were collateral damage in a much bigger crime. Kessler scrolled down. But here's the part that's going to hurt them the most. Look at the metadata. Nora leaned closer. The fabricated documents had been created on Voss's personal laptop, edited by Diane Pruitt, and stored on a server that was supposed to be encrypted but wasn't. Every keystroke, every deletion, every alteration had been captured and time-stamped. They left a digital trail, Nora whispered. They're not criminals. They're administrators playing at being criminals. They made every rookie mistake in the book. Kessler smiled without warmth. The FBI loves cases like this. Clean, documented, impossible to deny. Torres appeared in the doorway. We've got a problem. The hospital's PR firm just released a statement claiming Miss Hale is refusing to cooperate with their internal investigation and that her silence suggests she has something to hide. Nora's hands clenched. That's a lie. Of course it is. But it's already running on local news. They're trying to muddy the waters, create doubt. Torres looked at Kessler. We need to respond. No, Kessler said. We let them dig their own grave. Every false statement they make is another count of defamation, another lawsuit, another nail in their coffin. Senator Cross's legal team is documenting everything. Nora's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. Ms. Hale? The voice was male, nervous, young. My name is David Ortega. I'm a resident at Crescent Bay Memorial. I was in the ER the morning you were fired. I saw what happened with Mateo. Nora's heart rate picked up. Okay. I need to tell someone. I need to go on record. You saved that kid. I was there. I saw a doctor. Caro arrived late, saw him scream at you, saw him lie to administration about what happened, and I didn't say anything because I was afraid for my career. His voice cracked. I'm done being afraid. I want to testify. I want to help. Have you talked to the FBI? Not yet. I wanted to ask you first if you think it would matter. Nora closed her eyes. It matters. Every voice matters. Call the federal tip line. Ask for Agent Reeves. Tell them I sent you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. You're speaking up now. That's what counts. She hung up and looked at Kessler. That's the 4th call I've gotten from hospital staff wanting to testify. How many more are out there? Dozens, probably. Once people see the power structure collapsing, they feel safe enough to come forward. It's a cascade effect. Kessler checked her watch. You've got a video deposition in 2 hours. Federal prosecutors need your statement on record before they file charges. You ready? Do I have a choice? Not really. The deposition took place in the safe house's converted dining room. Nora sitting across from a camera while 2 assistant U.S. attorneys asked questions that ranged from procedural to devastating. They wanted every detail. what she'd witnessed, what she'd documented, who'd said what and when. They asked about the morning she saved Mateo, about the fabricated reprimands, about conversations she'd had with Voss and Caro over the years. She answered everything, clearly, precisely, without emotion. When they asked about the night she saved Emma, she had to pause. The memory was still too fresh, too raw. But she pushed through, describing the collapsed airway, the failed intubation attempts, the moment she'd made the cut that brought Emma back. One of the attorneys, a woman named Chen with sharp eyes and sharper questions, leaned forward. Miss Hale, in your professional opinion, would Emma Cross be alive if you had waited for additional authorization before performing the cricothyrotomy? No. How certain are you? Completely. She had less than 2 minutes. Waiting would have killed her. Chen nodded. And when you saved Mateo earlier that day, the child whose case led to your termination, would he have survived if you'd waited for Dr. Caro to arrive? No, his airway was completely compromised. He would have suffered brain damage or death within 3 to 4 minutes. So your decision to act without authorization directly saved his life? Yes. And Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital fired you for that decision? Yes. Chen sat back. Thank you, Ms. Hale. Your testimony will be instrumental in our case. The deposition ended at 8:30 p.m. Nora felt hollowed out, like she'd given away pieces of herself that couldn't be replaced. Kessler brought her soup that tasted like salt and vegetables and nothing else. She ate it anyway. At 9:15 p.m., Torres's laptop chimed with an urgent alert. He pulled up a live news feed, and Nora watched as a reporter stood outside a federal courthouse, voice grave and urgent. In a stunning development, Dr. Vincent Caro has been arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. According to the indictment unsealed an hour ago, Dr. Caro allegedly participated in a scheme to systematically overbill Medicare for procedures that were either not performed or performed by non-physicians. The indictment also alleges that he fabricated evidence to terminate a nurse who posed a threat to the scheme's secrecy. The camera cut to footage of Caro being led from a federal building in handcuffs, his face pale and defeated. Gone was the arrogant surgeon who'd screamed at Nora 12 hours ago. In his place was a man who'd just realized he'd destroyed his own life. The reporter continued. Gerald Voss, former chief of staff at Crescent Bay Memorial, is also expected to face charges. Sources close to the investigation say additional arrests are likely as prosecutors build their case. Meanwhile, Senator William Cross has called for a congressional hearing on patient safety and whistleblower protections in healthcare settings. Nora watched Caro disappear into a waiting vehicle and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a quiet, cold certainty that justice was a slow machine, but when it finally moved, it was thorough. Her phone rang. Senator Cross again. Have you seen the news? He asked. Just now. Good. I wanted you to hear this from me before it goes public tomorrow. The hospital board has voted to offer you a settlement. Full reinstatement with back pay, public apology, and $5 million in damages for wrongful termination and defamation. Nora's breath caught. $5 million? They're terrified. They know if this goes to trial, a jury will award you 10 times that amount. They want to make this go away quietly. Cross paused. My advice? Don't take it. Why not? Because you're worth more than their hush money. Because accepting their settlement means signing a non-disclosure agreement that prevents you from ever speaking about what happened. And because the world needs to hear your story, not their sanitized version of it. Nora stared at the wall, thinking. $5 million would change her life. Would give her security, freedom, the ability to never work another shift if she didn't want to. But it would also bury the truth. What do you recommend? She asked. Reject the settlement. Let them face a jury. Let the public see exactly what they did and why they did it. And in the meantime, consider my offer. Build something new. Create the kind of place where people like you are protected, not punished. I'm not an administrator. I'm not a leader. You led last night when everyone else froze. You led this morning when you could have stayed hidden and let others fight your battle. Leadership isn't a title, Ms. Hale. It's a choice you make when no one else will. The line went quiet. Nora could hear Cross breathing, waiting. I need time to think, she said finally. You've got it, but not much. The settlement offer expires in 72 hours. Cross's voice softened. Emma's being discharged tomorrow. She's asking for you. I'll be there. She hung up and looked at Kessler, who'd been listening from the doorway. What would you do? Kessler didn't hesitate. I'd burn them to the ground. But I'm not you. Nora stood and walked to the window. Outside, darkness had swallowed the pine trees. Somewhere in that darkness, Crescent Bay was still reeling from the collapse of its most prominent hospital. Careers were ending. Reputations were shattering. The truth was spreading like a wildfire that couldn't be contained, and she was at the center of it all. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Dr. Singh. The nurses are organizing. We're demanding oversight, policy changes, protection for anyone who speaks up. We want you to lead the effort. Will you help us? Another text, different number. Ms. Hale, I'm a reporter with the Washington Post. I'd like to interview you about systemic problems in hospital administration and how they endanger patients. Would you be willing to talk? Another. I'm a healthcare attorney specializing in whistleblower cases. Your story could change federal policy. I'd like to discuss representation. The messages kept coming, offers, requests, people who saw her not as a victim, but as a catalyst, a symbol, a weapon that could be wielded against a broken system. Kessler appeared beside her with a fresh cup of coffee. You're not going to be able to hide much longer. Tomorrow, you're going to have to make a choice about who you want to be in all this. I just want to be a nurse. That ship sailed the moment you saved Emma Cross. You're a public figure now. The question is what you do with that platform. Nora sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot and caffeinated and exactly what she needed. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a teacher, help people learn, make a difference. She laughed without humor. Ended up in nursing because I couldn't afford medical school. Spent 11 years taking orders from people who barely knew which end of a stethoscope to use. And now everyone wants me to be something I never asked to be. Maybe that's the point, Kessler said quietly. Maybe the people who change things are the ones who never wanted the spotlight in the first place. At 11:30 p.m., Torres's laptop erupted with alerts. He swore and started typing frantically. What is it? Kessler demanded. Diane Pruitt just filed a lawsuit against the hospital, claiming she was coerced into fabricating evidence and is now being scapegoated. She's naming Voss, Caro, and 4 board members as co-defendants. Torres looked up. She's also requesting protective custody and offering to testify against everyone. Kessler laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. She's trying to rebrand herself as a victim. Unbelievable. Will it work? Nora asked. Depends on what evidence she has. If she kept copies of emails, recordings, documentation, she might be able to cut a deal. Kessler's expression hardened. But she's still complicit. She signed those fake reprimands. She executed the termination. She stood there and watched them destroy you. Nora thought about Diane Pruitt with her legal pad and her skeletal efficiency. About the woman who'd processed her termination without a flicker of emotion. Now that same woman was claiming she'd been forced, that she was a victim too. Let her testify, Nora said. Let her tell the truth about what they did. I don't care if she saves herself in the process. As long as the truth comes out. Kessler studied her. You're more forgiving than I'd be. I'm not forgiving. I'm strategic. Every person who testifies is another piece of evidence. Another nail in the coffin. Pruitt wants to save herself. Fine. She can do it by burying the people who used her. At midnight, the house phone rang. A landline Nora hadn't noticed before. Torres answered, listened, then handed it to Kessler. She listened for 90 seconds, her face unreadable. Then she hung up and turned to Nora. That was Senator Cross. The hospital board just held an emergency vote. They fired their entire executive staff, dissolved the legal team that released the defamatory statements, and hired a crisis management firm to handle the fallout. They're also offering you a revised settlement, $10 million, no NDA, full public apology, and a seat on the board of directors for the new trauma center they're planning to build. Nora blinked. 10 million? They're desperate. They know the story breaks nationally tomorrow morning. They know every major outlet is going to run with it. They want to control the narrative before it controls them. What did Cross say? He said it's your decision, but he also said they're only offering this because they're terrified of you. Not of the lawsuit, of you, of what you represent, of the fact that you're not going away quietly. Nora walked to the window again. The darkness outside was complete now. No moon, no stars, just blackness and the faint reflection of her own face in the glass. $10 million. A public apology. A position of power in the very system that had tried to destroy her. Or she could walk away. Build something new. Start from nothing with only her name and her reputation as tools. I need to see Emma first, she said. Before I decide anything, I need to see her. Kessler nodded. I'll arrange it. Tomorrow morning, before the news breaks. Nora turned back to the room. Torres was monitoring a dozen screens, tracking the story as it spread across social media, news sites, forums. Kessler was on her phone, coordinating security. Morris stood guard by the door, silent and watchful. And Nora stood in the center of it all, a woman who'd been fired for saving a life and was now holding the future of an entire hospital in her hands. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Lori Chen. We're not going back to work until they meet our demands. 47 nurses walked out tonight. More joining tomorrow. We're calling it the Hale Protocol. No punishment for life-saving intervention. We're fighting for you. For all of us. Nora read it 3 times. Then she showed it to Kessler. You started a movement, Kessler said softly. I just did my job. No, you changed the rules, and now everyone else wants to play by your version. Outside, a car pulled up, headlights cutting through the darkness. Morris tensed, hand moving to his sidearm, but relaxed when he saw the vehicle. Kessler checked her phone. Senator Cross, she said. He's here. Cross entered alone, looking exhausted but determined. He nodded to Kessler and Morris, then focused on Nora. I wanted to tell you in person, he said. The FBI just arrested 3 more administrators. The fraud scheme was bigger than we thought, over $60 million across 5 years. Your testimony is the keystone. Without you, they don't have a case. With you, they don't just have a case, they have a precedent. Nora felt the weight of it settling onto her shoulders. What happens if I take the settlement? If I just walk away? Then the hospital spins this as a personnel dispute that got out of hand. They pay you to disappear, restructure quietly, and in 6 months it's like none of this ever happened. The fraud case continues, but without your public testimony, it loses its human element. It becomes just another white-collar crime. And if I don't take it, then you become the face of healthcare reform. You testify publicly. You show people what happens when institutions prioritize money over patients. You make it impossible for anyone to ignore the problem. Cross's eyes were steady. But you also put a target on your back. There are people with a lot to lose if this goes public. They'll come after you, your credibility, your past, anything they can use to discredit you. Let them try, Nora said, and her voice was steel. I've got nothing to hide. Cross smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. That's what I hoped you'd say. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is a formal offer, not from the hospital, from me. I want to fund a new pediatric trauma center. State-of-the-art, focused on emergency intervention and frontline decision-making. I want you to design it, run it, make it everything Crescent Bay Memorial should have been. Nora took the envelope but didn't open it. Why me? Because you proved that one person with courage can change everything, and I want to give you the resources to do it on a scale that matters. He paused. Emma's alive because you refused to follow rules that would have killed her. How many other children are we losing because people are too afraid to do what you did? The question hung in the air. Nora looked down at the envelope, at the future it represented. Then she looked at Cross. I want to see Emma first. Then I'll give you my answer. Fair enough. Cross checked his watch. She'll be discharged at 9 a.m. I'll have security escort you to the hospital. He left the way he'd come, quiet, efficient, a man who knew how to deploy power precisely. The house settled back into watchful silence. Nora opened the envelope. Inside was a proposal, detailed, comprehensive, a trauma center built around a single principle: trust frontline medical professionals to save lives and protect them when they do. The budget was staggering, the scope was ambitious, the timeline was aggressive, and at the bottom, in handwriting she recognized as Cross's. You saved my granddaughter. Let me help you save everyone else's. Kessler read over her shoulder. That's not an offer. That's a blank check. It's a responsibility, Nora corrected, and I'm not sure I'm ready for it. No one ever is. That's what makes them the right choice. Nora folded the proposal and slid it back into the envelope. Tomorrow, she'd see Emma. Tomorrow, she'd face cameras and questions and the full weight of what she'd started. Tomorrow, the world would know her name and her story. But tonight, she was just a nurse who'd done her job, who'd saved 2 children and watched an empire crumble. Her phone lit up with one final message. From Emma's father. She wrote you another note. I'll give it to you tomorrow. Thank you for giving me my daughter back. Nora closed her eyes and let herself feel it, all of it. The exhaustion and the fear and the strange, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd done more than survive. Maybe she'd started something that couldn't be stopped. And somewhere in Crescent Bay, in a federal holding cell, Gerald Voss was learning that the woman he'd thrown away was about to become the most powerful person in healthcare reform. Morning came cold and bright, the kind of clear winter dawn that made everything look sharp-edged and inevitable. Nora stood in front of the mirror in the safe house bathroom, staring at a stranger. Clean scrubs, navy blue this time, provided by Kessler. Hair pulled back, face pale but composed. She looked like a nurse again. She felt like something else entirely. Kessler appeared in the doorway. Transport's here. We're taking 2 vehicles. 1 decoy, 1 with you. Hospital's already swarming with press, but Cross's security team has a route that bypasses the main entrance. How's Emma? Stable. Improving. Awake and asking for you every 20 minutes, according to her father. Kessler's expression softened. You ready for this? Nora thought about the question. Was she ready to face the child she'd saved? To accept gratitude she wasn't sure she deserved? To step into a future she hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse? No, she said honestly. But let's go anyway. The drive took 40 minutes, most of it on back roads that wound through suburbs Nora had never seen. Morris drove with tactical precision, eyes constantly scanning mirrors. Kessler sat beside Nora in the back, monitoring communications on her phone. Somewhere ahead, the decoy vehicle was drawing the media swarm away from their route. They entered the hospital through a service entrance used for supply deliveries. No cameras, no reporters, just orderlies and kitchen staff who glanced at them with curiosity but didn't interfere. Kessler led them through corridors that smelled like industrial cleaner and recycled air, up a service elevator to the 5th floor, the pediatric wing. 2 Secret Service agents stood outside a private room. They recognized Kessler and nodded her through. Inside, the space was bright and sterile, filled with flowers and balloons and cards from well-wishers. And in the bed, propped up on pillows with a tube still taped to her throat, was Emma. She looked impossibly small. Her dark hair had been washed and braided. Her face had regained color. But it was her eyes, alert, alive, tracking Nora the moment she entered, that made Nora's chest tighten. Senator Cross stood beside the bed, one hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. Emma's father sat on the other side, holding her hand. Both men looked exhausted and grateful in equal measure. Ms. Hale, Cross said quietly, thank you for coming. Nora approached the bed slowly, like she might startle Emma if she moved too fast. Up close, she could see the surgical site. Clean, healing, managed by someone who knew what they were doing. The girl's oxygen saturation on the monitor was 98%. Heart rate steady, blood pressure normal. Emma reached for something on the bedside table. Her father handed her a notebook and a pen. She wrote carefully, then turned it toward Nora. You saved me twice. Once when I was dying. Once when you showed me people can be brave. Nora's throat closed. She sat down in the chair beside the bed and took Emma's free hand. The girl's fingers were warm and steady. You're the brave one, Nora said. You survived something that should have killed you. You're here because you're a fighter. Emma wrote again. My grandpa says you got fired for saving someone like me. I did. That's not fair. No, Nora agreed. It's not. Are you going to fight them? Nora looked at Cross, who was watching the exchange with quiet intensity. Then she looked back at Emma and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Yes, she said. I am. Emma smiled, or tried to, the tube making it awkward. She wrote one more line. Good. Bad people should lose. Senator Cross's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went grim. The hospital's holding a press conference in 20 minutes. They're announcing the settlement offer publicly and claiming you've agreed to terms. Nora stood. I haven't agreed to anything. I know. They're trying to force your hand, make it look like you're backing out of a done deal if you refuse. Cross's jaw tightened. It's a power play. They think you'll cave rather than face public scrutiny. Then they don't know me very well. Cross smiled like a predator. No, they don't. He made a call, spoke rapidly in a voice too low for Nora to hear, then hung up. My communications team is setting up a response. If you're willing to go public, we can have you in front of cameras in 45 minutes. What would I say? The truth, all of it. No lawyers filtering your words, no PR team softening your message. Just you, telling the world exactly what happened and why it matters. Nora looked back at Emma, who was watching her with eyes that had seen too much too young. She thought about Matteo, who was home now, alive, breathing, probably driving his mother crazy with questions. She thought about the nurses who'd walked out, the doctors who'd called to testify, the system that punished people for being right. Set it up, she said. The press conference was held in a community center 3 blocks from the hospital. Neutral ground, accessible, impossible for Crescent Bay Memorial to control. Senator Cross's team had worked fast, assembling a podium, microphones, and seating for the media in under an hour. By the time Nora arrived, the room was packed. She stood backstage with Kessler, listening to the murmur of the crowd. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. You don't have to do this, Kessler said. You can still take the settlement. Walk away. Build a quiet life somewhere they'll never find you. That's not a life, Nora said. That's hiding. Sometimes hiding is smart. Maybe, but I'm done being smart. I'm going to be right instead. A aide appeared and gestured. 2 minutes. Nora took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Then she walked onto the stage. The cameras were blinding. Flashes erupted like a swarm of fireflies. Reporters shouted questions before she even reached the podium. Senator Cross was there, standing to the side, but he didn't speak. This was her moment. Nora gripped the podium and looked out at the crowd. Somewhere in there were allies. Somewhere were enemies. Most were just people looking for a story. She was about to give them one they'd never forget. My name is Nora Hale, she began, and her voice was steady. 48 hours ago, I was fired from Crescent Bay Memorial Hospital for saving a 7-year-old boy's life without administrative permission. This morning, I saved an 8-year-old girl using the same procedure. The difference is that the second time, powerful people were watching. And suddenly, what I did wasn't insubordination. It was heroism. The room went quiet. I want to be clear about something, Nora continued. I'm not a hero. I'm a nurse who did her job. The real heroes are the nurses and doctors still working in hospitals across this country, making impossible decisions with limited resources and constant fear that doing the right thing will cost them their careers. I'm here because I had the privilege of saving someone powerful enough to fight back. Most people don't get that chance. She paused, letting the words settle. Crescent Bay Memorial has offered me a settlement, $10 million, a public apology, a seat on the board. They want me to be quiet, to accept their money, and to let this story fade away. She looked directly into the nearest camera. I'm rejecting their offer. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked frantically, the noise swelling until Cross stepped forward and raised his hand for silence. Nora waited until the chaos subsided. Then she continued, I'm rejecting it because money doesn't fix a broken system. Apologies don't bring back the patients who died while nurses were too afraid to act. And I won't be silent while the same people who fired me for saving a child continue to run hospitals and endanger lives. She pulled out a folder, the forensic report on her personnel file, the evidence of fabrication, the proof of fraud. She held it up. This is the documentation showing that Crescent Bay Memorial fabricated my disciplinary record to justify my termination. They created fake reprimands, backdated evaluations, and destroyed evidence, all to silence someone who witnessed their fraud. The FBI has this evidence. Federal prosecutors have this evidence. And now, So do you. She set the folder on the podium. I'm calling for a complete investigation into patient safety protocols at every hospital in this state. I'm calling for federal whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who prioritize patient lives over administrative policies. And I'm calling for the immediate termination of every administrator at Crescent Bay Memorial who participated in this fraud. The reporters were on their feet now, hands raised, voices competing. Nora raised her voice. One more thing. I've been offered the opportunity to build a new kind of trauma center, one designed around the principle that frontline medical professionals should be trusted and protected when they save lives. I'm accepting that offer, and I'm inviting every nurse, every doctor, every person who's ever been punished for doing the right thing to join me in creating something better. She stepped back from the podium. The room exploded with questions, but Cross's security team was already moving her toward the exit. Kessler appeared at her side, guiding her through the chaos. Outside, the cold air hit Nora like a slap. She gulped it down, hands still shaking, adrenaline making her dizzy. That was perfect, Kessler said. Every word. Nora's phone was already vibrating, hundreds of messages flooding in. She ignored them all except one from Dr. Singh. You just changed everything. We're with you. The SUV was waiting. Morris opened the door and Nora climbed in, still processing what she'd just done. She'd rejected $10 million. She'd declared war on a hospital system. She'd committed herself to building something that might fail, and she'd never felt more certain of anything in her life. The story broke globally within an hour. Nora watched it unfold on Torres's monitors back at the safe house, headlines cascading across every major outlet. Nurse rejects $10 million settlement, demands healthcare reform. I won't be silent. Whistleblower nurse calls for federal investigation. Hospital fraud scandal expands as more staff come forward. The hospital's press conference, held simultaneously, was a disaster. The administrator they'd sent to announce the settlement looked blindsided when reporters told him Nora had already rejected it publicly. He'd stammered through non-answers while the board's attorney frantically texted him updates. By the end, he'd fled the podium without taking questions. Crescent Bay Memorial stock, the hospital was part of a larger corporate chain, dropped 18% in 3 hours. Senator Cross called at 2 p.m. The hospital board just voted to accept all your demands. Full investigation, termination of remaining administrators, complete restructuring. They're terrified of what comes next. What about Voss and Caro? Voss's attorney is negotiating a plea deal. Caro's already given testimony implicating 6 other administrators and 2 board members. The FBI expects to make more arrests by end of week. Cross paused. You broke them, Ms. Hale, completely. Nora felt no satisfaction, just tired certainty. Good. There's something else. Emma wants to see you again. She's being transferred to a rehabilitation facility tomorrow, and she asked if you'd visit before she goes. I'll be there. That evening, Nora sat alone in the safe house living room, watching the sun set through the pine trees. Her phone had finally stopped buzzing, or she'd stopped noticing. The world had shifted around her in 48 hours, and she was still trying to understand her place in the new landscape. Kessler appeared with coffee. You've got interview requests from 60 different outlets, book deals, speaking engagements. A documentary crew wants to follow you for the next year. I'm not interested in being famous. Too late. You already are. Kessler sat down across from her. But you can control what you do with it. You can use this platform to change things, or you can let it consume you. Your choice. Nora sipped the coffee. It was still terrible. What would you do? I'd burn it all down and build something better, but I'm not you. Kessler leaned forward. You asked me yesterday what happens next. Here's my answer. You build that trauma center. You train the next generation of nurses to be as brave and competent as you. You create a model that other hospitals have to follow because you proved it works. And every time some administrator tries to punish someone for saving a life, you remind them what happened to the last people who tried that with you. Nora smiled despite herself. That's a long-term plan. You got a better one? She thought about Emma's note, about Mateo's mother's text, about the 47 nurses who'd walked out in solidarity, about Dr. Singh standing up in front of cameras, about all the people who'd been silent until someone showed them it was possible to speak. No, she said. I don't. The next morning, Nora returned to the hospital to see Emma one final time before the girl's transfer. The media presence had tripled. News vans lined the streets, reporters camped out with thermoses and folding chairs, everyone waiting for the next development. But Cross's security team had refined their route. Nora entered through the loading dock, up a freight elevator, into the pediatric wing without encountering a single camera. Emma was sitting up in bed, the tube finally removed, a bandage covering the surgical site. Her voice was raspy and quiet, but it was there. "Hi," she whispered when Nora entered. "Hi yourself," Nora said, sitting down beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore? Tired? Alive?" Emma smiled. "My dad says you turned down a lot of money because of me." "Not because of you, because of what's right." "What's the difference?" Nora considered the question. "You're one child, but there are thousands of children who need people willing to fight for them. If I took the money and stayed quiet, I'd be helping you and abandoning them. I couldn't do that." Emma nodded slowly. "My grandpa says you're going to build a hospital, a trauma center, a place where people like you get the best care possible, and people like me don't get punished for providing it. Can I come see it when it's done? You'll be the first person I give a tour to." Emma reached for her notebook again, wrote something, then handed it to Nora. "You showed me that one person can change everything. I want to be like you when I grow up." Nora's vision blurred. She set the notebook down carefully and took Emma's hand. "You already are," she said. "You survived something impossible. You're braver than I'll ever be. But you saved me. And you're going to save someone else someday. That's how this works. We take care of each other." Emma's father stood near the window, watching the exchange with wet eyes. Senator Cross stood beside him, silent but present. After a few more minutes, Nora stood to leave. Emma caught her hand. "Thank you," the girl whispered, "for everything." Nora squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for fighting. Thank you for being here." She left the room feeling lighter somehow, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying since the moment she'd made the first cut to save Emma's life. Outside, Kessler was waiting with news. Federal prosecutors just announced charges against 9 administrators from Crescent Bay Memorial. Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, witness tampering, the whole list. Voss is looking at 15 years. Caro might get 10 if his cooperation deal holds. What about the others? Diane Pruitt got immunity for testimony. 2 junior administrators are negotiating plea deals. The rest are fighting it. Kessler showed Nora her phone. A photo of Voss being led into court in handcuffs, his face gray and defeated. This is going to be the biggest healthcare fraud case in a decade. Nora studied the photo. Gerald Voss, who'd sat behind his desk and stripped her badge with such clinical efficiency, now looked small and broken. She felt nothing, not vindication, not pity, just closure. "It's done," she said quietly. "Not quite. You've still got a trauma center to build." 3 weeks later, Nora stood in an empty warehouse on the edge of Crescent Bay, looking at architectural renderings spread across a folding table. Senator Cross's team had moved fast. Permits secured, contractors hired, equipment ordered. The space would be transformed into a state-of-the-art pediatric trauma facility in 8 months. Dr. Singh approached, carrying coffee and paper cups. "You're really doing this." "Looks like it. I want in. Whatever role you need, clinical lead, training director, floor nurse. I'll take it." Nora turned to her. "You'd leave Crescent Bay Memorial?" "It's not Crescent Bay Memorial anymore. New board, new administration, new name. They're calling it Riverside Regional now, trying to distance themselves from the scandal." Singh smiled wryly. "And yes, I'd leave in a heartbeat to work somewhere that actually values what we do." "You're hired." Over the next hour, 6 more people arrived. Nurses from hospitals across the state, a pediatric surgeon from Seattle who'd read about Nora's story and wanted to be part of something revolutionary, an emergency medicine specialist who'd been fired from his own hospital 3 years ago for similar reasons and saw this as vindication. They gathered around the table, looking at the renderings, asking questions, offering suggestions. Someone mentioned creating a training program. Someone else suggested partnering with nursing schools. Ideas flew, building on each other, creating something none of them could have designed alone. Nora listened more than she spoke, letting the experts shape the details. But when someone asked about the facility's core mission, she didn't hesitate. "We protect the people who save lives," she said. "Nurses, doctors, anyone on the front lines. They get to make the calls that matter without fear of punishment. We document everything. We train relentlessly. We maintain the highest standards. But when it comes down to it, when a child is dying and seconds count, we trust our people to do what's right." "And if they make a mistake?" someone asked. "Then we support them, investigate what went wrong, and fix the system that failed them. We don't sacrifice people to protect our reputation." The room went quiet. Then Singh raised her coffee cup. "To the Hale Center," she said. Others joined the toast. Nora felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, not pride exactly, but purpose, direction, the sense that she'd found the thing she was meant to do. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mateo's mother. "My son asked me to send you this." Below was a video of Mateo grinning into the camera, showing off a science project about the human respiratory system. At the end, he looked directly at the lens and said, "Thank you for saving my life, Nurse Nora. When I grow up, I'm going to save lives too." Nora watched it 3 times, then showed it to the group. "That," she said quietly, "that's why we're doing this." The trial began in late spring. Nora testified for 2 days, answering questions from prosecutors about the fraud scheme, the fabricated records, the systematic silencing of dissent. She faced cross-examination from defense attorneys who tried to paint her as vengeful, ambitious, opportunistic. She answered every question with the same calm precision she'd used to save Emma's life. On the 3rd day, the defense rested. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Gerald Voss was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Dr. Vincent Caro got 12 years despite his cooperation. Diane Pruitt walked free, but lost her professional license. 3 other administrators received sentences ranging from 3 to 7 years. Crescent Bay Memorial, now Riverside Regional, paid $42 million in restitution to Medicare and settled a class action lawsuit from patients who'd been billed for fraudulent services. And in a courtroom packed with reporters and cameras, the judge made a statement that would be quoted in medical ethics textbooks for the next decade. This case represents a fundamental betrayal of the healthcare profession's sacred duty to prioritize patient welfare above all else. The defendants chose profit over people, reputation over responsibility, and power over principle. Their punishment reflects not just the laws they broke, but the trust they violated. Let this verdict serve as a warning to any administrator who believes their authority supersedes a healthcare worker's duty to save lives. Nora watched from the gallery as Voss was led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She saw no remorse in his expression, just the bitter understanding that he'd underestimated the woman he'd tried to erase. She left the courthouse through a side exit, avoiding the reporters, and found Kessler waiting with the SUV. "It's over," Kessler said. "No," Nora replied, climbing in. "It's just beginning." The Hale Pediatric Trauma Center opened on a clear October morning, exactly 11 months after Nora had been fired. The building was modern and efficient, filled with equipment that represented the cutting edge of emergency medicine. But more importantly, it was filled with people who believed in the same principle that had cost Nora her career and then given her a purpose. Senator Cross cut the ribbon. Emma, now 9 years old and fully recovered, stood beside him. Media crews documented every moment, but Nora stood in the background watching her team, nurses and doctors she'd personally recruited and trained, prepare to receive their first patients. Dr. Singh found her near the supply room. "You should be up there with them. This is your victory." "It's not about victory," Nora said. "It's about making sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." "Still, you deserve recognition," Nora smiled. "I got recognized. I got vindicated. I got justice. Now I want to work." The center's first patient arrived within an hour, a 6-year-old with a severe allergic reaction, airway compromising, minutes from death. Nora watched her team move with practiced efficiency, watched a nurse make the call to perform an emergency cricothyrotomy without waiting for administrative approval, watched the child's oxygen saturation climb back toward safety. No one questioned the decision. No one threatened termination. The nurse filled out the incident report, documented the intervention, and continued her shift, exactly as it should be. That evening, after the rush of the opening had faded and the building had settled into its regular rhythm, Nora stood in her office, a small room with a window overlooking the trauma bay. Her desk held a framed photo of Emma and Matteo together, taken at the ribbon cutting. Below it, the note Emma had written, "You showed me people can be brave." Beside that, a plaque from the American Nurses Association recognizing her advocacy for frontline healthcare workers. And beside that, her original hospital ID badge from Crescent Bay Memorial, the one Voss had stripped from her 11 months ago. Someone had found it in the hospital's discarded property and mailed it to her with a note. "You earned this. Don't ever forget what they tried to take." She wouldn't forget, but she wouldn't let it define her either. A knock on the door. "Doctor." Singh entered carrying 2 cups of coffee that actually smelled good this time. "Long day," Singh said, handing her one. "Good day. The team's asking when you're going to start the next training session." "Next week. I want to focus on high-stress decision-making and how to document interventions in real time." Singh nodded. "You know there are nursing schools across the country using your case as curriculum now? Teaching students about ethical practice and institutional accountability?" "I heard." "You changed the profession, Nora, not just for us, for everyone coming after us." Nora sipped the coffee, looking out at the trauma bay where her team was preparing for the night shift. "I just did my job. Everything that came after was just people deciding that doing your job shouldn't be punishable." "That's a revolution." "Maybe, but it's a quiet one." Singh smiled. "The best kind." She left, and Nora stood alone in her office, watching the sun set through the window. Somewhere in the city, Crescent Bay Memorial, Riverside Regional now, was trying to rebuild its reputation under new leadership. Somewhere, Gerald Voss was beginning his 18th year of a prison sentence. Somewhere, nurses were making impossible decisions and trusting that the system would protect them instead of punishing them. And here, in a building that existed because she'd refused to stay silent, children were being saved by people who'd learned that courage was contagious. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "My class is doing a project on heroes. I picked you. Is that okay?" Nora typed back. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a nurse who did her job. Pick someone braver." Emma's response came immediately. "That's what makes you a hero. You don't think you are." Nora smiled and pocketed the phone. She took one last look at the trauma bay, at the monitors glowing in the dimming light, at the equipment standing ready, at the team moving with quiet confidence. Then she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. She had rounds to make, staff to check on, a dozen small tasks that would keep the center running smoothly. Because that's what nurses did. They showed up. They did the work. They saved lives and asked for nothing except the chance to do it again tomorrow. And if the world wanted to call that heroism, fine. Nora called it Tuesday. She walked out of her office and into the controlled chaos of the trauma bay, where a new shift was beginning and lives were waiting to be saved. The woman they'd tried to erase had become the foundation of something they could never tear down. And every child who walked out of the Hale Center alive was proof that one person's courage could change everything. Not because she was special, but because she refused to believe that doing the right thing should ever be wrong. The doors opened. An ambulance arrived. Alarms sounded. Nora stepped forward to meet it. Ready. The end.